During these 40 days of Lent, we've been trying to experience and express in our own lives something of what must have been experienced by the Hebrew slaves as they set out on the journey of a lifetime, the original exodus from Egypt. Little did they suspect what lay ahead. Not, as for us, 40 days of extra time of prayer and penance, but 40 years of daily hardship and uncertainty, of wandering aimlessly, it seemed at times, through a hostile environment, and of wondering if they had let themselves be duped by false promises. Who was this God anyway? He didn't even have a name, and he was given to disappearing just as quickly as he had come. It didn't take long for the disillusion to set in and for the murmuring and grumbling to break out. This was not how they would have arranged the journey. Didn't this God know that there was a well-established trade route along the coast that would avoid so much suffering and would see them safely ensconced in the promised land in a matter of months at most? Any long haul takes its toll. It's draining, demanding, and people start looking for shortcuts or ways of cutting the whole thing short and returning to base. The book of Numbers in chapter 11, verse 5, tells us that the people began to look back and to recall regretfully the good old days, even though they had been slaves in Egypt. Think of the fish we used to eat, they said. Think of the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. All we have now is tasteless manna. That discontent would eat away at them until finally they would assert themselves and take matters into their own hands. And in Exodus chapter 32 we have the story of the golden calf, which shows that there is always a deep-seated desire to do things our way, to fashion for ourselves a God who will go where we want to go rather than a God who wants to make all the decisions and who decides where and when we will go. The story of that original Exodus, the passing over from oppression to freedom, from slavish attachment to self to willing service of God and one another, spells out, if you like, in technicolor and on the big screen what continues to go on in the black and white mundane routines of our own lives of faith. We too, on our journey of faith, at times can grumble about what God expects of us. We too at times might wonder if God has forgotten us or think he might be even punishing us. And we can sometimes echo the cry of Psalm 13, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" The Lenton Journey brings all of us to the experience of Good Friday. And in his Gospel account of the Passion, Mark stresses that Jesus was not spared even though he was Son. He too had to experience the emptiness, the fear, the thought that this was the end. And Mark underlines that with the version that he gives us of Jesus' final words on the cross, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Sadly, for many people, that seems to sum up the end of the story for them. They're more familiar with the reality of the suffering and pain and continue to wonder and perhaps be tempted to wander off and avoid it if possible. And so it would have been for the first disciples, reeling from the events of the first Good Friday, and so it is for us. That's when we need the experience of Holy Saturday and what it has to offer us. Holy Saturday helps us to appreciate what Plato had already guessed in the 4th century before Christ about life. things are not always as they seem. The first appearance deceives many. Good Friday seems to express perfectly how we feel a lot of the time. Not just once or twice, but often enough. Down, beaten, dispirited, feeling forsaken, abandoned even by God. We can identify at times with Jesus' cry from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then comes the longest day, as Holy Saturday is often called, what in Latin is known as a dies non. Dies is the word for day. Non means simply blank. There's nothing going on, it seems. There's just silence. But things are not always as they seem. A few years ago, I read a wonderful article by a priest from Leeds, Father Daniel O'Leary, on Holy Saturday. And it just seems to fill in the time between the drama of Good Friday and the earth-shattering event of Easter Sunday. Don't be fooled, he said. Don't imagine that Jesus was simply lying in the tomb, resting and recovering, biding his time before getting back to his Father's side in heaven. That would have been a bit of an anticlimax after all he had been through. No, the Apostles' Creed tells us he descended into hell, and on the third day he rose again from the dead. It might seem like a dies non to us, but it certainly wasn't a dies non for our Lord. He didn't just die on the cross, and that was it. No, he allowed himself to descend into the deepest depths that death can provide, to explore the full scope of its darkest and deadliest effects. He invaded the world controlled by the Prince of Darkness, went right into the gaping mouth of death to bring light and restore life and offer hope at the deepest core of despair. As Father O'Leary put it beautifully in his article, in death, his sacred heart has become the innermost heart of the world. Now, this is an earth that is transfigured, an earth that is set free, that is evermore redeemed from death and futility. Holy Saturday comes alive when we compare the way the resurrection came to be depicted in Western and Eastern Orthodox art. They're very different. I read once, I can't remember where, but it's quite dramatic, the difference. In Western art, the risen Lord is shown stepping out of some sort of stone coffin, a sarcophagus, and emerging from the tomb carrying a banner with the sign of the Lamb, victory, on it. It's quite different in Eastern art. Jesus, it seems, is portrayed as bursting from the fires of hell in the most dramatic way. He's clutching Adam and Eve, the human race, one under each arm, and he hurtles through the gates of hell, coming from the inside. He doesn't reach down to draw them up or drop down a ladder or a rope. No, Jesus himself ventures into the red-hot heart of hell, those painful, aching parts in all our lives where we experience our deepest fears and anxieties, where parts of us are in danger of dying, where we feel alone, desperate. Things are not always as they seem. The Lord is beavering away, rooting for us always, working deep within us to keep us from despair and to surprise us again and again with the experience of him Eastering in us. And in his article, Father O'Leary recalled one particular Holy Saturday when he felt an overwhelming sense of being alone. There was something stirring in him, he felt, a longing, a yearning to be near something vast, something all-embracing, something full of life, something that spoke of mystery. And he headed for Scarborough on the the east coast of England. And he stood there watching the sea, the long rolling waves that just kept crashing in one after another. And there, he said, he sat and reflected on the longest day. When I read that, I found myself recalling a story that I had come across in some source or other, that I had noted down in my book of quotes, and I used one Easter Vigil Mass. And after Mass, on the way to the hall where we used to gather with those who had just been brought newly baptized and anointed into the church and made their first communion, we'd go over to the hall for a bit of a celebration. On the way to the hall, the husband of a Catholic parishioner, who himself wasn't Catholic, he had served many years in the Navy though, he announced to his wife that he was going to become a Catholic because that story had touched him in a deep personal way. Well, here's the story. Once upon a time, there was a salt doll who lived so far inland that she had never seen the sea. And yet the salt doll had an irresistible drive to see it. So one day she set out and walked hundreds of miles towards the ocean. At last she arrived, and as she stood on the seashore, enraptured, she cried out, "O sea, how I would love to know you." And lo, to her surprise and delight, the sea answered her, "To know me, you must touch me." So the salt doll walked towards the sea, and as she advanced into the oncoming waves, she saw to her horror that her toes began to disappear, and then her feet, and she cried out, "O sea, what are you doing to me?" And the sea replied, "If you want to know me fully, you must be prepared to give something of yourself." And as she walked further into the water, her limbs, then her body began to disappear. And as she was totally dissolving, she cried out, "Now at last I know the sea." The message is simple. It's the message of Easter. Each one of us is a part of God, as the salt is part of the sea. And we have an inbuilt longing for God, to be touched by God, to know ourselves to be part of something vast and all-embracing and full of life and energy and mysterious. And that is what Easter has to offer. All the pent-up love and life of God gushing to embrace us. The traditional liturgy of the Easter Vigil brings Holy Saturday, the longest day, and every long haul to a happy close. All the ingredients are designed to address our deepest needs. The fire, the Easter fire for warmth and welcome. The Paschal candle for light in the darkness of fear and despair. Hope for a new, brighter future. The long readings to remind us of our roots, our tradition. We are part of an ongoing story. The renewal of our baptismal promises and a fresh start. The Easter Gospel, the good news. Jesus is risen. Death has been conquered. Death has no power over us. God is all around us, reaching and wanting to reach through to touch us and strengthen us and challenge us and heal us and assure us and forgive us and lift us up and carry us safely home. Have a wonderful, happy Easter. God bless.